The music you were just hearing was Hildegard of Bingen, O coruscans lux stellarum, O glittering starlight. And this doesn't exactly go with it, but this is also by Hildegard. She painted a lot of her visions, and we were just talking about how much it looked like a representation of a chakra back there. And I don't think she would have known anything about that at the time. And it's a little hard to see out there, but they're all faces. On the outer rings, they're all angels, and everything is, there's just faces, and they get smaller and denser as you go in. If anybody understood the cosmos, I think it was Hildegard. But I'm going to talk more about Pythagoras for the moment. So this concept of a harmonic order of the universe has been with humanity for a long, long time, in fact, thousands of years. And Pythagoras was really one of the first to give it some solidity. It was popularly believed by his contemporaries that he could hear the music of the spheres, that he could hear this music of the cosmos. Whether he did or not, we don't know. But it was Pythagoras who discovered that consonant intervals in music of any sort have mathematical ratios in them, and that they can be expressed in terms of integers, whole numbers, right? So this idea was also taken up by Plato and many others, and then transferred into models of the structure of the universe, as it was commonly known at the time. So these ideas of the harmonic and intervallic structure of music were discovered by Pythagoras in the 5th century BC. We're talking a long time ago, when he was experimenting with strings. The story has it that he walked past a blacksmith one day and wondered at the different tones that he was hearing from the hammers and why they sounded at different pitches. Well, that was obviously the difference in size of them. But then he decided to experiment with stretched string. And so when he would pluck one, it would sound a certain note. And when he would stop it at various nodal points on the string, it would sound a different note. Exactly midpoint sounded an octave above the sound of the whole string, right? So he discovered that the octave had a ratio of 2 to 1, right? The perfect fifth, he did that at stopping the string at 2/3 of the length, so that was a ratio of 3 to 2. Perfect fourth, a ratio of 4 to 3. And he found that every interval had a mathematical ratio like that, which was constant across the range, no matter how high or low you went. It was the same mathematical principle, right? So if I just use my friend piano here, A, above middle C. Who knows how many cycles per second that vibrates? 440 times a second, right? 440 cycles per second. So if we cut that string in half, and essentially the octave above is about half that length, a little thinner, so it doesn't quite need to be that much. How many cycles would that? 880. And 220, 110, 55, etc., right? In the 19th century, this was all sort of corroborated by Heinrich Hertz, who put a different word to it, frequency, and developed a method to measure it. So these days, I can buy a cheap app on my phone, even get a free one, which can tell me exactly that. A tuner for the phone, which will tell me what the exact frequency is sounding at any given point. So Pythagoras' ideas from the 5th century BC are actually validated in the 19th century by Heinrich Hertz. Yeah? So Pythagoras, observing this number theory in nature, because these same proportions, remember, he also experimented a lot with the golden mean or the golden section, and took that from a pentagram. And the long side is exactly the length of the next two shorter sides, and the next one is, you've probably seen it all. Anybody ever see there's a wonderful little film called Donald Duck in Mathmagic Land. Anybody know it? It's a great way of teaching this stuff to kids. Now, what I'm telling you right now is what I teach to my 14-year-olds at Buffalo Seminary. So if they can get it, I think you will as well. He saw this in nature all over the place, in the way that a tree branches and the distance between each layer of branches and that sort of thing, in looking at seashells, in looking at the spiral inside a chambered nautilus. And they all follow the same exact principle throughout nature, and then he starts observing it in the cosmos, in the planets, in planetary motion, in distances, in speeds. And then he's now seeing this number theory happening in music. So here's some of my favorite parts here. Pythagoras, observing much of his number theory in nature and the cosmos, believed number was the key to the universe. When he discovered the perfection of exact numerical ratios in music, similar to what he saw in nature and the cosmos, he concluded that music was the ordering principle of the universe. Right? So he wondered about the relationship of these ratios to the larger world. Ratios. In Greek, the word for ratio is logos, which also means reason and also means word. Word more like a verb, right? In Christianity, of course, Christ is often referred to as the Logos, the Word of God, but the active word. He considered that the harmonious sounds of playing or singing were merely an approximation of a larger harmony that exists in the universe, also expressed in number, which was the music of the spheres. Right? This music in the universe, the music of the spheres, that our music was an approximation of that. Right? This was his thought about it. Aristotle, in his Metaphysics, says that the Pythagoreans supposed the elements of numbers to be the elements of all things, and the whole cosmos to be a musical scale and number. This was meant quite literally. The heavenly spheres and their rotations through the heavens produced tones at various levels, and together these tones made a harmonious sound that humanity's music could only approximate at best. Thus, music was number made audible. And music was humanity's participation in the harmony of the universe. So, by taking part in this heavenly harmony, music could induce spiritual harmony in the soul. Right? We all can relate to that, I think. Plato taught that rhythm and harmony find their way into the inward places of the soul. In his Republic, Plato shows the political implications of music's power by invoking Damon of Athens, who said that he would rather control the modes of music in a city than control its laws. Why? Because the modes of music have a more decisive effect on the formation of the character of its citizens. Right? Okay, I'm going to put you all to sleep now, so I'm going to play lullabies, right? Or I'm going to get you ready for battle by playing, assertive, aggressive brass music and drums, right? That these things stir the soul. Why did the Highland bagpipe come along, right? To scare the hell out of the enemy, right? But if you say, well, you can't do this and you can't, people are going to disobey you all the time, right? But to get inside of them, inside their soul, with music, has, at least according to Plato and Damon of Athens, a more decisive effect. I want to make a reference to something on the second half of the program. It's my little setting of the Hamlet piece. Because this will allow me to bring up Kepler, and you're going to say a few things about Kepler as well, right? There's a line in there that says, "No planets strike." Okay, that's the reason there. It's on the program, something planetary. We're not referring here to planets crashing into each other, but rather planets having a sort of a malignant influence on human nature. Sorry, just trying to find my place here. So to continue along this line, Kepler believed that the soul of each person contains a geometric blueprint of the zodiac at its birth. He said the intermediary light reflected at be ready for this one. The intermediary light reflected at angles off moving planets strike the triangles, squares, and hexagons inscribed on the soul, right? Thus forming a direct and intimate connection between the planetary movements and man. Now, he wrote all this out, right? He wrote out all his charts and musical things when he talks about the music of the spheres, right? And in that, we sort of think, oh, he was just a quack when he was talking about that kind of thing. Not so. From his diagrams and things, he discovered here that this led modern optics. He was the first to postulate the ray theory of light to explain how vision works, right? He also gave the first correct explanation of the structure of the human eye. These are both a result of that preceding theory about all those reflections of at right angles off moving planets and things. Yeah, I don't know. It was maybe 6 or 7 years ago. I read a newspaper article about some planet in the maybe Alpha Centauri solar system, which an astrophysicist was claiming sounded to be flat. All right. In music of the spheres, maybe. But to oversimplify, sound is produced by vibration, and that vibration moving through some sort of medium. All objects vibrate. A planet vibrates. Maybe it's a very low pitch for measuring, but still, you can give it a number. And if you can give it a number, you can give it a pitch, right? Maybe Kepler wasn't too far off the mark. So, Kepler, Ptolemy, Copernicus, Pythagoras, they all thought a lot about music as well as the stars. So we hope that these modes of music that we'll present for you tonight will find the way into the inmost parts of your soul. Thanks.
My name is Peter Reczek, and a disclaimer, I'm a scientist, not an artist, and I'm certainly not a musician. Don't go, we just happen to look at the world a slightly different way. Not better, just different. And so what I'd like to spend the rest of my time talking about is the beautiful music that we're going to hear on this program. Some of that has been influenced by some scientific discoveries, and part of that came from Copernicus's really radical idea of putting the center of the universe at the sun and have the planets rotate around it. But his idea of putting the sun at the center was actually not the first time that was suggested. In fact, a Pythagorean named Aristarchus was the first person to suggest that the sun was at the center of the universe. Unfortunately, it took roughly 2,000 years for anybody to really prove that, and that was in Copernicus. What happened after that was, as you can imagine, many scientists, many astronomers became interested in Copernicus's new idea and started refining it. And one of those people was Kepler. So Copernicus's idea of that sun-centered universe, which you can see, in fact, in the book on display out in the foyer, happened in 1543, and Kepler was born much later than that. His main work was to modify, through data, the idea that the planets revolved around the sun in a circular form. And his form was elliptical, just like you see here, right? So it's an extended circle. And that raises a couple of interesting questions that are more scientific in nature, right? That the sun itself is not at the center, but sort of off to the side at what mathematicians call a focal point. Okay, so you can see, for example, that a planet going around this particular orbit would be closer to the sun at perihelion, which we would consider to be the summer solstice, right? And then farther away from the sun at aphelion, which is the winter solstice, right? So you can see that rotation around that planet would look something like an extended circle. Now, there's an interesting thing about ellipses from a mathematical perspective, and that is that in any given unit of time, they will kind of stretch out the same area. So the area of that triangle, A, Sun, B, is actually the same as the area C, Sun, D. Okay? It takes a planet the same amount of time to traverse that triangle as to traverse that triangle. Okay? And that kind of makes sense, right? The closer you are to the sun, the faster you're going to scoot around it. The farther away from the sun, the slower you're going to scoot around it. But because of the distances, those areas that you see, those areas are the same. All right? So Kepler took a look at that, and in roughly 1619, which is the date of his Harmonici Mundi, which is out on display for you, a first edition from the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library, which we have right here in Buffalo as a resource. You can see it at intermission. He looked at that and said there were a bunch of things that were sort of interesting about that. For example, just the thing that I mentioned, that things move slower out here and faster around there, but they nonetheless have a period going around that. And he really took that idea of going around in circles at different rates and converted it into music. And this is a page from that book that we have on display. And it basically shows you different periods for different planets. So for example, Saturn looks like that. Jupiter might be slightly accented a little bit. But look at Mars, for example, and look at Mercury. Very close to the sun. It's the closest planet to the sun. Increasing till you get very close to the sun, and then decreasing. So if we look back at the diagram, and apologies, I'm a scientist, I'm not a musician, but as I go around this, right, I see something that goes, ooh, ooh. Was that good? Am I into? Thank you. Mormon Tabernacle Choir, here I go. So you get the idea, okay? Now, if I were to embed on this many planets, of which at the time of Kepler, there were 5 known, okay? You can hear that there would be a different pitches for each of those. Different. One might, the Earth might be ooh, whereas Saturn might be woo, or something of that nature. Okay. Now, granted, because planets are sort of spinning around the sun at different rates and in different geographies, if you will, putting all the 5 planets together make music. And that is the point, I think at least, of the music of the spheres. Because the planets at any given time are in different positions, but they're still kind of carving out this elliptical orbit. And as shown here, Kepler tried to indicate that for the different planets in this way. Now, there's a lot more to this, obviously. There's a lot more mathematics associated with it. There's a lot more wave mechanics, if you're into physics a little bit, or Fourier transforms, or any of that kind of thing. But you get the idea that the notes, if you will, the positions of the planet as it's going around and around, is changing as it approaches the sun and then as it falls away from the sun. So that's the sort of essence of the music of the spheres, okay? And just to kind of put that into context a little bit, that was written by Kepler and published by Kepler in 1619. So this year is the 400th anniversary of that idea. And the beauty of it, and I hope if you take nothing more home with you about this except that idea, is that there was an intimate connection between science, because this diagram was generated based on hard observational data and number crunching and mathematics and all that kind of thing, right? And yet it has a certain elegance in this thing called music that just as we like to think of as being as far away from science as possible, but in fact is just another way of viewing the universe, of viewing life, of viewing reality. And so my point about this tonight is to say that when we view reality, we can view it from lots of different ways. No way, no single way, not science, not the arts, not philosophy, not religion, are the only way, but they are complementary. They all tend to enrich our view of the universe. And that's what I think Kepler so well shows in this particular book. Now, the last idea that I want to leave you with is that this diagram, as revolutionary as it was, created a lot of tension and a lot of disagreement in the world at large, among scholars and even among people, everyday people, that were just thinking about, what does this mean? What does it mean to change the nature of the universe? In particular, the question that was asked is that if things are spinning around like this, right? If the Earth is actually moving around the sun, just as we described here, how come stuff doesn't just fly off? You know, how come we're sitting here? How come we can sit? And it took 150 years between the time of Copernicus showing that the sun was at the center with the Earth spinning around. 150 years later, this man, Isaac Newton, discovered the law of gravity. And with that law of gravity, he could explain why things don't fly off. He also could explain why the sun was at the center with the planets going around. And that solidified philosophy. A lot of philosophers at the time, in particular Immanuel Kant. It solidified literature from Milton's Paradise Lost to Galileo's dialogue of the two world systems. It solidified law, it solidified religion, it solidified every aspect of life. And so it's not just the science, it's not about just predicting that planets move around the sun. It's also about the impact that that discovery had on all of life. Thank you.